the cold came first. It lived in the nailed-shut window seams and hissed through the gaps in the barracks boards, turning every breath into steam and every joint into a protest. Children pressed their hands to the iron stove that had been allowed to die hours earlier, feeling only the ghost of heat in its shell. Mothers tugged blankets tighter and counted heartbeats. The men stared at the door, at the braced planks, and the soldiers beyond, and weighed what a night could cost. Outside, Fort Robinson lay under a hard crust of Nebraska winter, the parade ground blue in moonlight, and the cottonwoods rimed white. Orders had come down that the Northern Cheyenne were to return south. They had refused. Now the food and water were cut off, the windows boarded, and the cold had been invited inside to finish the argument. It had not started here. 2 winters earlier, the Northern Cheyenne had been pushed to the Indian Territory far to the south, where fever came up from the lowlands and hunger came in every season. People died with no fight left in them. In September 1878, 2 leaders, Little Wolf and Morning Star, whom soldiers called Dull Knife, took hundreds north, aiming for the Yellowstone country and the Powder River, where their dead were buried and the air did not burn your lungs. Soldiers rode from every direction. Shots cracked across prairies and farm fields as the column broke and ran. Little Wolf led one group toward Montana. Morning Star's band, tired and trailing children, was captured and marched into Fort Robinson in late autumn. They accepted shelter and promised to winter there and speak again in spring. Then different orders arrived. They were to go back. When they refused, the shutters were hammered tight, the stove wood locked away, and the rations stopped. Days stretched. The men spoke softly, trading the same question until it stopped sounding like a question at all. What choice was left? A woman told her husband that if he had to die, he should die with their son behind him and not in front. A boy, too young to have seen much beyond fences and guard posts, asked if snow always glittered like sand. Morning Star, older than most, watched his people's eyes go dull and knew what cold could do to a spirit. He told the men to be ready when the dark grew deep. On the night of January 9th, 1879, a hand found the first loose slat. Someone had worried at it for hours with a scrap of iron until the nail gave up. Another plank followed, and then another. The barracks held its breath. A man eased through the gap, shoulders scraping, and dropped into the snow. He waited, counting to 10, then 20, listening for a challenge. None came. He waved low. A woman pushed a wrapped baby through, muffled the child's cry against her chest, and followed. Someone at the door took a hatchet to the crossbar in a single blow. The sound was a cannon in the silence. The bar splintered. The door swung. The first men ran. Shouts rose from the picket lines. A rifle fired and a bullet snapped into the frozen dirt. Then the air filled with the flat bark of carbines and the deeper report of heavier guns from the yard. Snow boiled where rounds struck, throwing white dust into faces and mouths. In front of the barracks, men turned to fight, trying to draw fire while women and children streamed toward the shadowed ravines north of the fort. Some had pistols taken long ago and hidden, others carried only knives. They fired and moved, and the fort answered with discipline, volleys, reloads, command voices cutting the night. The Cheyenne ran for the trees along White River, for the broken country where a person could become a rock or a shadow and live till dawn. They made the bluffs. For a time, the land seemed to shelter them. The hills tumbled into draws and coulees that wound like veins away from the parade ground, and in those folds, the cold was something you could put your back against and still breathe. Morning Star moved with a knot of families, counting faces he knew by gait and by the sound of their breath. Somewhere behind, a young man named Little Shield bled into his leggings and refused to sit down because sitting meant stopping. A grandmother tore a strip from her dress to bind a wound on a child's arm and told him to keep his hand high because that makes blood lazy. Above them, the stars looked close enough to pluck. At first light, the soldiers came again, spread across the ridgelines and probing the draws, their breath mounted in white flags. The fort's commander had been given clear orders. The prisoners must be brought back or broken. Patrols pushed north and east, marking tracks, pausing at places where the snow was churned by many feet, following the blood drops when footprints ran thin. The Cheyenne split into smaller bands and used the land the way only people who have walked it slowly can, doubling back through scrub, climbing along limestone shelves where a misstep meant a fall, sliding belly down under banks of willow at the river's edge. They were hungry already, and the cold made a meal of endurance. When the soldiers found a nest of people, there was shouting, a volley, and then the dry click of metal and the next magazine, the next cliff, the next patch of brush. By the second day, the escape had stopped being a single story and become many small ones threaded through ice. A mother hid her daughter beneath a fallen cottonwood, packed snow over the girl's hair to dull its shine, and went out into the open to draw eyes away. A wounded man fell into a shallow cave where the limestone curved like a cupped hand. 2 boys lay against him to share what heat he had left. Morning Star's small party turned west, moving by night and sleeping in fits through the day, rubbing hands and feet to keep sensation. He had no illusions. The old and the very young paid first whenever the world turned hard, and the world had turned hard the moment the stove went cold. The soldiers found a group huddled in a ravine where the wind piled snow in drifts shoulder high. The first volley cut the branches above their heads and brought down a shower of frozen twigs. Someone fired back from too close to protect anyone and went still with the recoil. Women screamed names that had been said gently the night before and would never be said that way again. When the firing stopped, there were bodies scattered along the base of the drift and small shapes caught beneath them. A private folded his hands, unthinking, the way a person who has seen too much tries to hold something together inside himself. An officer told him to move on. The prairie does not linger. It takes and keeps moving. The hunt lasted for days. Each skirmish read the same when written in footprints and powder smoke. The Cheyenne had the land's twists and a desperate need that made them quicker than fear. The soldiers had numbers, supplies, and orders that did not bend. When a pocket was cornered, some fought until their guns were empty and then used knives. Others tried to run up the ice-slick slope and were driven back down into the hollow by fire that felt as impersonal as the wind. There were no speeches could be heard over the gunfire and the scraping of boots on stone. There were only choices made in seconds. This draw instead of that one, this body to shield this child, this breath, then the next. Morning Star stayed alive by refusing to be seen as a leader. He moved as a father and a husband moves, with purpose that is measured in arm's length. He led his family along a line of cottonwoods where the bark ran black and the snow below was thinned by deer. At night, he listened for the steady, ragged breath of the people he loved and counted forward to the next dawn. He knew that if he could reach friends among the Oglala to the north, the soldiers might be asked to stand down. He knew, too, that the path from knowing to reaching is lined with things that kill without caring. When it was over, the ravines north of Fort Robinson held more bodies than anyone could stand to count, with their eyes open. Survivors were led back under guard, wrapped in blankets that could not argue with the cold, but at least remembered what warmth used to feel like. Some few slipped through entirely and found shelter later at Pine Ridge, where Red Cloud's people hid them and sent word that not all stories end at a fort's gate. Many did not live to hear that news. The fort's men had executed their orders. The Cheyenne had carried out their decision. In the ledger of the post, the one with ink and columns and names, those days were brisk lines and precise numbers. In the snow, they were holes in the earth and hollows where bodies had been pressed to keep a child quiet while boots passed on the ridge above. Years later, the hills still answer quietly if you walk them in winter. You can stand under the cottonwoods and see, in the way wind skates the drifts, how a person could have vanished or been found. The fort is a museum now. Children trail their hands along display cases and read placards that talk about orders, timelines, detachments, and a breakout. The words are clean. The old barracks boards are planed smooth. Nothing there smells like cold iron or hunger. Outside, where the draws bend and the river holds to its line, the ground keeps what the ledgers never could. The weight of footfalls, the quick decisions made in the dark, the resolve to run when staying meant dying by inches. Morning Star lived to see his people north again, but the path went through nights when the cold pressed its palm over every mouth and told the living to be very quiet if they wanted to remain so. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.